From early documentaries through children's drama and crime thrillers to science fiction and camp fantasy, what film can I be thinking of? We are going to go on a journey into the mind and imagination of a remarkable filmmaker. I'm delighted to welcome Mike Hodges.
I would have waved, but I think I would have fallen over.
Well, it's taken us 2 years longer than planned, but we're all here, so let's enjoy. I want to start, and we've got a lot of clips to show as well, is to talk a bit about the fact that you did make really significant documentaries. You worked on World in Action, you made documentaries for Tempo, New Tempo, that dealt with arts and culture. How did you get your start in filmmaking, and particularly in documentary?
Well, it was, as always, it's a series of accidents. I qualified as a chartered accountant, which is crazy, isn't it? I qualified when I was about 22, and then I had to do my national service in the Navy, and I was on a minesweep on the lower deck for 2 years. And what I saw in the ports, the fishing ports, it was the Fishing Protection Squadron. What I saw in the fishing ports really shocked me. I had never seen poverty like it. I came from a sort of lower middle class family. Anyway, the accountancy was for my parents. And I said to them, when I qualify, I'm going to do what I want to do. So I came to London, didn't know anybody at all. And I don't know, London seemed smaller in those days. You know, we just seemed to bump into people and meet people and so on. Anyway, I met, it's insane, but I met the son of the motoring correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. And I thought, this, a journalist. I mean, I was a bumpkin, from the town. And anyway, he was a floor manager associated with Diffusion. He said, there's a job probably at Teleprompter. So they were based in Carnaby Street at the time. The Teleprompter was, AutoCue sort of replaced it now, but it was a kind of big laboratory role with all the scripts typed out. In those days, television was mostly live. So we were very much in demand. Well, I got the job eventually for 10 quid a week, no overtime. And what it did do was it allowed me to see on the floor how everything was made, because everything was mysterious in those days. Filmmaking was a mystique. It was a mystique about it. And you really, you had to crack it. I remember trying to find a book on directing, and I think there was one by Paul Rother. And so I did 2 years of this. And in addition to that, you would work 10 days, and then you'd have 4 days off. And in the 4 days off, I started writing scripts. And of course, the other thing was that, again, you were meeting people, because you were traveling to Manchester and you worked with all the companies. You worked with the BBC, you worked with all the commercial companies associated with Fusion, ABC Television, Thames Television. And so you acquired quite an experience of just watching people, how it was all put together. And basically, I decided that, it wasn't so mysterious, the process, and I could probably do it. Then you go so one of the people I met, am I going on a bit here? And one of the people...
We have been waiting to hear all this.
One of the people I met was a Canadian, because they had to bring in quite a lot of people to operate commercial television. Now, the BBC didn't have any experience of this kind of thing, where you have commercial breaks and so on, and everything had to be timed very precisely. So this man, his name is Lloyd Shirley, and Lloyd is a very unsung, finally, hero of television. He started lots of major TV series from Callan and so on and so on. And anyway, we became friends. And he was at ABC Television, and he then gave me a job as a scriptwriter for a ridiculous thing called advertising magazines. Probably none of you remember advertising magazines, but these were 15, 20-minute programs. And they were set in a fictional situation. There's one, the best one was Jimmy Hanley in Jim's Inn, it was called. It was a fake pub. And the customers would come in and say, I've had a terrible day today. And Jimmy would say, what's been the trouble? He said, I did my lawn in, my back's gone like that. He said, what you need to do is use this lawnmower. And he'd pick up a lawnmower and put it on the counter. And these were hysterical things. Anyway, so Lloyd gave me a job, because he was running this department at ABC. And I started, all you did was just join up all the advertising, the advertising copy. But you used to get 25 quid a script, so that was, I was doing all right. So that was really the beginning. And then from Lloyd, he then, he offered me, so I did various other things. And then, then while I was doing that, something very strange happened because I was sharing a flat. Oh, see how accidental all this is? It's quite fascinating, I think. What about you? So anyway, I shared it with 2 cameramen from ATV, an advertising guy, and there was me. And the flat was 25 quid a week. We all put in whatever, 5, 6, 7 quid. And we had one small extra room. And we advertised, and some guy came along who's an Australian. And this Australian could hardly put 2 pennies together. He ran a rather tacky theatrical agency in Charing Cross Road. It's all in one room, real. And anyway, the flat broke up, and the name of the man who was the tenant, the new tenant, was called Robert Stigwood. So Robert Stigwood became one of the biggest impresarios in the country. So anyway, he's somewhere else. And anyway, the phone rings, and it's him on the phone to me. And it was just after the Perfumer scandal, and Stephen Ward had committed suicide. I mean, he'd just been basically trapped by the establishment. They were taking their revenge. And he committed suicide. Now, he had a PR man who knew Stephen Ward, and he said he had inside information and we could make this documentary about him. And that's what Stigwood rang me about. He was going to finance this. And he put me together with a film director called Jimmy Hill, who was a wonderful man. Now, Jimmy did those films with the tiger, Virginia McKenna, and I can never remember the name of the film. So do you remember the ones with... That's right, yeah. Anyway, thank you.
You got the right place to get the answer to any questions.
Yeah, talking to me these days is a bit like a quiz, I have to warn you. It's sort of, I give clues. Anyway, so Jimmy and he put us together, and I was meant to write a script. Jimmy's going to direct it. So, but it was too early. There wasn't enough ballast yet to make this documentary. So Jimmy and I said, we told Robert we just couldn't do it. So he said to me, well, are you interested in doing something else? So I said, well, yeah. He said, because I've got this in with Tim Hewitt, who was the Australian guy who started World in Action. World in Action was a kind of tabloid television show, really. And Tim was an ex-Beaverbrook man. He worked with, I think, the Northern Express. And anyway, Tim, who I adored, he was and he was great. It was a great program, World in Action.
Well, and we're going to show a clip from it in a minute. Yeah, but because of, although mostly I want to show them in chronological order, right. A bit like the time sort of morphing in Black Rainbow. The first 2 clips, which I'm going to show back to back, are from Tempo and New Tempo from 66 and 67. Could you just tell us a bit about that series that you worked on? Because it was a kind of art series for ITV.
So, Lloyd Shirley, the same person I said, then moved on. He took over another department in ABC, and that department was the arts, included the arts program. Now, Tempo had been started, it was the big flag program, arts flag program for ITV. It was meant to compete with Monitor. And Kenneth Tynan started it. And the first edition of it was fronted by Lord Harlech. They had 2 floors above the Ritz Hotel where they edited the film. They shot everything in film of 35mm colour. I mean, this is insane. Anyway,
I was going to say, those were the days, eh?
Well, they were absolutely insane. Anyway.
I think just partly because we have so much of your career to get through, I'm quite tempted to show the clips and let's talk a bit more about it afterwards. So this is the arts documentary strand that you worked on for ITV. It covered a rich range of subjects. And in the mid-60s, very much aware of that Marshall McLuhan idea of the medium being the message. So the 2 clips you've got, which we're going to play back to back, the second one is Stimulants, featuring R.D. Laing discussing LSD, in which the film attempts to convey the experience of a trip. But before that, can we show both the clips straight after each other? The first one is Buskers, about the dying world of old musical acts making a living on the streets of London. Let's have a look.
Ronnie Ross has always worked in the centre of Leicester Square, dwarfed by theatres, cinema hoardings and big star names. Does he feel bitter about working on the street?
No, good
I do.
heavens,
Yeah,
no,
I
I
do.
don't.
I do.
Not at all. Not at
I
all.
do.
That's the way the popsy.
Yeah, I do.
That's the way the cookie crumbles, isn't
I
it?
do.
You know, it's the way the popsy
Sorry,
clips.
but I do.
Oh, you're some kind of
I
a
must
nut.
be honest, I do.
Not at all. That's the way it goes, isn't it?
If you had an offer
She's
to...
my greatest fan. No, of course I would.
I must
don't...
be honest, I do.
No,
Yes.
look, who wants to work on the street?
Above all else, to thine own self be true.
Well, look, keep quiet
This
for a
is
minute. You
me.
keep interrupting my lines. Listen, look, who wouldn't want to work in the theatre? Who wouldn't? I did, didn't I? Before, I mean, it's different now, but I did. But,
Yeah, but even there, you never got a break, did you?
all right, look,
The
stop.
sock comic used to step on you every
All
time.
It's a drug which, as I was using words to try to convey earlier, literally puts you out of your mind. And no one who's got any respect for themselves will take a trip out their mind casually. I think it requires as much inner preparation and as much sense of responsibility as deciding, say, to climb the Matterhorn. But I wouldn't stop people climbing the Matterhorn, even though some people fall off.
So Adrian Mitchell, the poet, I gather, wrote about stimulants. I don't know how you survive without having your head chopped off. It caused quite a reaction, didn't it?
Yes, it did. But that one was... first of all, I want to make clear, I was the producer in the main of those series. And that one was directed by James Goddard. Now, what happened was that when ABC television saw this film, because of that remark that R.D. Ronnie Lang made, the film never saw the light of day, was never shown ever in this country till tonight. Anyway, you were going to say, what was the question?
Well, I was just interested in the working on those ideas, those
Yes.
other episodes where, you talk about information overload.
Yes.
And even the Buskers one, where you can see the seeds of the way your fictional films are rooted in realism. I mean,
Yes.
amazing couple, and she's even quoting Hamlet at him. And that sense of a real faded, kind of gritty London.
Yes.
And that sense of grittiness is in many of your films. Were you conscious of drawing on that documentary heritage when you began?
It's inevitable, I think, because but everything I've done or written has really been based on observations of mine or things I've read, or I like to root everything. I mean, when we come to talking about Get Carter, it was a question of finding somewhere visual that would tell you how Jack Carter happened, really. So everything I did and have ever done has always been rooted in reality and from newspapers or magazines or my own experiences. So yes, I'd like to, because it makes me rooted. It makes me feel comfortable with what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, we're definitely going to talk about Get Carter shortly. Well, let's have another look at another clip. So you made a number of films for World in Action, the landmark Granada TV current affairs strand. And one I think is really revealing because of your work in America and your fascination with politics and the establishment. It's from the episode Goldwater for President, or How to Win Friends and Influence People. Before we see it, from 1964, remind us about what was the fascination with Goldwater. He was an extreme right-wing Republican candidate for president, wasn't he?
Well, after my experiences in the Navy and seeing what I'd witnessed, these Hogarthian scenes that I witnessed, I'd gone in as a chirpy little young Tory. I came out not exactly, well, pretty rabid, a socialist. I never joined the Labour Party, but I certainly was very, very politically activated in the opposite direction to which I went into the Navy. So basically, everything that I did after that is coloured by this experience. And America at the time was obsessively anti-communist. And my first assignment for World in Action was to go to do a program on Goldwater, who was the Republican nominee for the president. And he was rabid. He was crazy, this guy. I mean, he wanted to nuke North Vietnam, and and I ended up. He lived in Phoenix City, and I went to his flat. I'm missing one very important thing is that Granada had this. This is for Granada Television, and they had a connection with the Maisel brothers, who are a documentary couple. One was on. David was on sound, I think, and I was on picture. I forgot which way around it was. Anyway, they were brilliant because they just had their camera and they had a little lamp on the top, and they just worked freely. It was so wonderfully free because other than that, filmmaking was very. I remember sound mixers who had white gloves. There was a rigidity about it all. And the ACTT, our union at the time, they insisted on having 2 camera and two on sound. So I remember going to Vietnam and I had 2 on camera, and there's me, and nobody on sound. And I went out to cover a first sequence I did was on a riot in Seoul, in Hue. And I remember arriving there, the American television people, it was one person, they were doing the whole thing. One person, there I am with 3 and no sound. Anyway, so it was a very rigid kind of process. Now I'm working with these 2 guys, and we ended up in Dallas a year after Kennedy's assassination. And I'm covering this convention, and it was extraordinary. I mean, the Texans are very, very, very gentle. Well, not gentle. They're very polite people. Let's put it that way. But they're rabidly anti-communist. And they hated me because I had a beard, and they thought that I worked for the BBC, so I was automatically a communist because the BBC was a communist organisation. That's right, and exactly, and the NHS was also a communist. So I found myself there. When they learned that I was working for a commercial company, they couldn't believe, you have commercial television? I said, yes, we have commercial. Oh, well, that's different. And then they took to me, right? What I didn't tell them is that the Granada Television was owned by 2 millionaire socialists, Bernstein brothers. So I thought I'll keep that to myself. That really would confuse them.
Well, you won their trust, and we see it's very intimate with them. Let's have a look at a clip from the convention of that episode.
Right, okay.
Everything at this convention shouts Goldwater. Hats, collars, glasses, flags, badges, books, banners, and people.
The plaques here are not for sale. These are, they can frame them themselves, but the plaques right here are not for sale. These are for donations only. And you can get them for as little as $2 a week.
They're 15 cents singly, they're 10 cents in quantity, 3 or more.
I have 2 for quarters.
No, 10 cents a piece in quantities of more than 1. It'd be 30 cents for 3. They're 15 cents for 1.
Goldwater got a lot of his support in the South because he voted against the Civil Rights Bill. Many Southern ladies agree with him.
The thing that has been put out in this country about the Civil Rights Bill is that it's giving the poor Negro his rights. It isn't. It's taking away mine and that poor nigger's rights, you see, because it has so little to do with the Negro. The issue has been it's a smokescreen.
Even the way her language slips.
Yes.
Is so revealing. What did you get out of that experience? Because it feels to me that you carried that memory through when you made films later.
Well, first of all, I was quite scared in Dallas, and it was also interesting that there were a lot of young people in the Republican Party, and 3 times we took them out and said, "Show us Dallas." And each time they all went straight back to the book
Depository.
store. That's it. And where Kennedy had been assassinated. And I'd say, okay, take us somewhere else. So there was nowhere else they could take you. The whole of the town was absolutely frozen with this moment, and you must hate it. So one became completely obvious that this kind of indoctrination within the within the American society had them in the most awful grip. They couldn't possibly work their way out of it. I then went, not shortly afterwards, or shortly after Magret Carter, I went to Russia under the communists, and you saw the same thing there, but in reverse. There was no advertising. It was all political, slogans. So you saw two opposite ends, and both countries totally ideologically conditioned. They just couldn't you go to talk to people in Moscow and they'd run away because you were a foreigner. No one wanted to see you talking to them. So you realize that this was total insanity, really.
And of course, the idea of manipulation, which we're going to talk about very shortly. But I want to show a clip from one of the children's dramas. And it's kind of fun to think of the man going on to make Get Carter, making children's TV. But you made such a lovely range of original TV films and dramas in the 60s and early 70s. And I want to take a look at near the very start of the first episode of a children's series called The Tyrant King, in which a group of London children overhear a stranger plotting dark things to investigate. But before that really gets going, we witness a scene of a crime. Let's play the clip.
Welcome to London. Places of interest which are open all day are the Zoo, Madame Tussauds and Kew Garden. Things to do in London. The principal museums and art galleries are open to the public on Sunday afternoon, as is the planetarium in Marylebone Road. In the morning, the colourful Sunday market in Middlesex Street, Aldgate, called Petticoat Lane, can be visited. The annual London Riding Horse Parade takes place this afternoon at Rotten Row Riding Track in Hyde Park. Music. The light music in the open air in Victoria Embankment Gardens is given this week by the Teddy Continental Orchestra. Today they give two performances at 3 and 7:30. Another opening concert is in Holland Park, given by the Scottish National Orchestra, conductor and Darby. The program includes works by Berlioz, Schubert, and Strauss, and also Mozart's New World Symphony. Welcome to London.
What I love about this is there's a real sense of enjoying the locations of London and making a virtue of them.
Yes.
And that seems to me, again, something that's a very Mike Hodges way of making film, that you root everything in a place. What did you try and do with The Tyrant King?
Tyrant King, first of all, Lloyd Shirley has now become head of drama. And Lloyd, I'd always told him that they should try, because in those days they put it on tape. And tape was difficult to edit, it was difficult to sell, because around the world there are all sorts of different versions and so on. So I kept saying to him, you must put it onto 16mm film. All your drama, then you've got a commodity you can sell. So what I did The Tyrant King for was to prove that economically you could make these films. They've been far more exciting because they're on location, and you've got a commodity at the end of it to sell. So it was economically sensible. And this was the six-parter that proved it, which then, eventually Euston Films came out of all of these films that I made for Lloyd, when he allowed me to start working on 16mm, which I'd done on World in Action every day for 2 years, So I was used to working on 16mm and liked it. So there was that. And then, I find it very odd that quite a lot of directors, I think, let location managers find the locations. I couldn't possibly do that. I don't see how anybody could decide what to use. So with Carter, for example, once I found Newcastle, because I hadn't been there before, I then, I said, that's where I want to shoot it. And Michael Klinger, the producer, said, fine. He left me there. And I just walked the town, and I walked it until I found all the locations I wanted. And looking for the locations, you get so much, you learn so much about the town and the subject matter that you're working on. You're saturating yourself in the film itself and the content of the film. So, looking for the locations and then using them is very important to me, very.
Absolutely. Now, I want to look at 2 more TV dramas of yours before we get to Get Carter. First, Rumour, which is about a sleazy, cynical Fleet Street tabloid hack who's on a story about a dodgy MP and his possible involvement in the murder of a prostituted woman. In this clip, the reporter's off to meet the victim's mother. But what you'll notice is the gap between the voiceover as the reporter writes the copy in his head and what we're actually seeing on screen. We'll talk about it after.
And now the thoughts of Chairman Sam. As I sped through the city with its monolithic Victorian buildings towering above me, I wondered if the rich and illustrious bankers and merchants who inhabit these parts ever pause in the relentless business of making money and think of the sad, sordid, poverty-stricken area on their doorsteps, exclamation mark. As my car slithered to a halt outside the peeling door, urchin children crowded round me, asking me for money. Stop. This is gangland. Stop. Here the notorious Cray brothers operated. Stop. Here Diana Webb, alias Lisa Curtis, grew up. Stop. Here I found her 46-year-old mother at number 25, Carley Road. I approached the door and was fearful of the tragic story it would open up to me. Stop. Next Sunday, Lisa meets the rich and influential Hercules Beaumont whilst taking her O-levels.
Wonderful. And of course, we start to see the way that you use voiceover.
Yes.
It's such a fascinating part of your work. You mentioned earlier how you had started work on a documentary about Stephen Ward. And this film very much deals with this idea of the establishment, their cover-ups, and how they might be manipulating the very people who think they're exposing them. Tell me a bit about Rumour.
Rumour, well, it's when I was at World in Action that I came to observe the Showbiz Pack. They were called I think they were called the Rat Pack or something at the time, and I saw a lot of kind of sleazy stuff being told, and and they were, and so much of it was lies. I mean, none of it's changed. Nothing's changed, by the way. And it's the same old stories going on. And I just wanted to make a film about it. And I came up with this idea where the guy is being fed a rumor, and he starts talking about it. The rumor gets spread, and what he doesn't realize that he's working his way towards being killed himself, because when he's killed, when he's murdered, then the rumor becomes reality. And that's what Rumour was about, certainly. And it was about freedom of the press. I mean, there's a whole scene at the end when he explains to the guy who's about to kill him that nobody believes what they see what they write in the newspaper, what they read in the newspapers. And he says, but they do. And the guy says that you should be more careful what you put in. So this was a very important film to me. It got me into terrible trouble with Fleet Street. They were saying things like, nobody will ever speak to a journalist again. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And all sorts of trouble got me into that.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
And any other trouble you'd like to tell us about? Or?
And that, well, there was one, I think it was the Daily Mail. They had a columnist there who wrote this nonsense about nobody wanting to speak to a journalist ever again. And he wrote this excoriating attack on me. And there's an old Fleet Street trick. They give you the contents of an article, and then they ask for you to reply. And that means they've got double the amount of space that they need. And so I had flu at the time, and Lloyd Shirley started answering the thing, and he got a very convoluted answer. And I said, Lloyd, I'll take over. And I did it from my bed. And basically, I just quoted from the Denning report, which had been the report on the Profumo scandal, and it talked about the newspapers, about being, that some of them most of them were fine, but a lot of them were totally, immoral, basically. And I just quoted that. And I also pointed out, it was a Sunday Mirror, that's right, it's a Sunday Mirror. So I pointed out that the weekend before, there'd been a nurses' strike, and this nurse who'd organized it, they found out that she was giving colonic irrigations to homosexuals. So they put her on the front page, and they ruined her life. I mean, absolutely devastated her life for no reason at all, apart from leading a strike against the nurses. So it was that was important for me.
And so this idea of powerful establishment forces, misdirecting, manipulating is kind of key to both Rumour, but also the next one we're going to look at, which is Manipulators from 1972. It's a half-hour TV play that was part of a series called The Frighteners. Two agents are watching a flat where it seems student radicals live and seeding the idea that the wife is having an affair. Let's have a look.
Been sick again?
Yes.
For God's sake, see a doctor.
Sort of.
Don't be a fool, David. You're ill. You look awful.
Quack.
At least you know what's wrong with you.
Oh, I know what's wrong.
He's phoned again. Look, David. Someone's playing a joke on us.
Liar.
I'm not a liar. Honestly, there's nobody.
Pavlov's fourth way of producing a breakdown was to confuse the dogs by constantly changing the food signals. In this way, the dog became uncertain what would happen next and how to face these confused circumstances. This would disrupt its normal nervous stability.
This fascination with the manipulation
Yes.
is something that is throughout your life, and I think it's partly rooted in your religious upbringing, is that right?
Well, it's partly that, yes. I mean, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and it's a deep indoctrination process. And when I finally, they say, lost my faith, I was about 14 or 15. And it's quite a chasm that opens up because your whole life is built around your religious activities, basically. So that was one thing. But the second thing was actually making Get Carter. Because I realized that it's odd because all my other films, this is made after Get Carter, and in between Get Carter and Pulp. And making of Get Carter, I realized that I actually had a talent for manipulating myself, and the cinema was a manipulative art. Now, it's absolutely ridiculous to think you can make films without being in some way manipulative. It's just crazy. But I decided that I would write about this and try and change that concept of what I was going to do. So this, in a sense, was a reaction to what I'd experienced and what I wanted to talk about, because the amount of manipulation which we all go through is intensifying, even if anything, since then. So I made The Manipulators. And also, the whole of the thing is a test as to how human the guy is. You see, the guy's on a test run, basically, for this. You don't know for which society, whether it's a secret society or whatever it is. But they're checking him out to see if he's human or too human. And he is. And that's it. He's finished. He's gone out. So that's a relevant point to this one.
Well,
dehumanization.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Get Carter.
Yeah.
And I have to say, every time I watch this film, it gets better and better. There's a kind of purity of vision about this film. And the clip I chose, I've tried to do a few things with it. It captures Michael Caine's screen presence, your eye for framing. We often see things through the door frame, so we're kind of aware of how we're watching things. And your ability to convey violence in flashes rather than in gratuitous detail. And you adapted it from a novel. Jack Carter, played by Michael Caine, has gone, for anyone who hasn't seen it, has gone to bury his brother, but quickly finds out he's uncovered a dark secret among Newcastle's gangsters who want him out of town fast. Let's have a look.
Jack?
Good evening.
I'd like a word with you, Jack.
That's nice.
Confidential, like.
You stay in the car. I'll come and listen. What do you want to tell me, Thorpe?
I've been asked to give you this. Train goes 4 minutes past 12. You've just got time.
That's very kind of somebody. Who do I have to thank? What happens if I miss the train?
Well, I've been asked to make sure you don't.
Oh, really? You're getting very optimistic in your old age, aren't you, Thorpe?
Let's stop pissing about. Are you coming, Jack? It'd be best. Right-o, lads. Poppy?
Even just the women dancing around their handbags, every detail of the documentary realism of that setting. I mean, there's a reason why people have such affection and have been going around trying to save that car park from demolition.
Yes, I know.
How do you feel about the kind of cult adoration of Get Carter? Why do you think it's resonated so powerfully and continues to?
Oh, I'm probably the last person to answer that. You probably know I got the book in January of 1970, and I wrote the script, cast it, found the locations and everything, and I was shooting by July. But anyone who knows anything about filmmaking, that was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, because it all happened so fast, it was made in a white heat. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I don't think I could ever do it again, but it was just wonderful feeling. I was just riding it like a crazy horse, and it's and you don't have time to think that it's going to be, have any legs, as they say in the film industry, to last. So it was all a bit of a surprise, frankly. It still is. Although I have to say they've just done a new print of it. It's wonderful. I see all sorts of things I had never seen before.
No, 45 shooting days, and you said, I thought filmmaking was always going to be like that.
Yes.
Decisions quickly taken and quickly acted on. Instinct always in the driving seat.
Yes. Well, look what happened after that.
But I think what you said about how you were in the white heat of it,
yes.
Your instinct, it was like all your powers at their peak.
Yeah, totally.
Tell me as well about the fascination with using the gangster format, because this is something that's important to you. And there's two things. One, I think you've talked about the genre as an autopsy on society's ills. So it's not the glamorization that interests you.
I noticed a lot of American gangster, B movies in particular, were really quite political. They show, and all those American authors like Raymond Chandler, they'd write these wonderful lines, and they were talking about the society in which their characters were operating, and they were analysing the society much more clearly than straight authors often. And I loved the B films. In those days, you had two films at each showing of a cinema. And the B films were these say the second rate, but they were usually in black and white, and they were often very political. And I adored them. I thought they were often better than the main feature. So I just adopted it because it could reveal so much. It's not just a story; it's actually showing, as Carter does, the state of the nation. Actually, I mean, Carter, think of it just the Northeast. It's not just the Northeast; it's the whole of Britain at that time. It was it still is, the worst now. It's more obvious, though. But it's totally corrupt, absolutely corrupt from top to bottom.
And also, the fact that pornography is it's the kind of plot point that really turns him into an avenger. Why was that element, that sort of the porn, so important to driving this? It's
important to remember that Jack Carter didn't go to Newcastle for revenge. He went there because his brother... There was something dubious that he felt about the way his brother died. When he gets there, he starts uncovering all sorts of... But the main thing that tipped him over was when he sees the porn film with possibly his own daughter, but certainly his brother's daughter, who's underage, and she's in this film. Now, anybody who knows anything about criminals, they have a curious...
there's a moral pecking order, isn't there?
Yes, they have a curious pecking order, and old women and children are right at the top, and that's about it actually in talk of pecking order. So when paedophiles, and this is a story about paedophiles, that's what drives him crazy, is that even in jail they're known as nonces, and they have a terrible life. The other criminals hate them for, it's a very sentimental. I suspect it's because they feel something dissatisfactory about their own lives. I think when Jack Carter sees the film and he starts crying, he's not necessarily totally crying for what for the young person involved in this, but he's crying for himself, I think, to a degree as well. He's crying for the fact that he realizes he's not normal. There's a scene on the ferry when he looks at there's a mother and children, and he looks at them, and he knows that he's not normal, and he'll never have a normal life. So I think that's it's a sort of sentimental angle. If you look at the Cray brothers, their affection for their mother, and it's I don't know about the Richardsons. I don't think they had any affection for anybody, frankly. But so there we go.
Well, we've talked already about how you were the one who came up with the specific setting for Get Carter, because there was no specific setting in the novel, am I right? And Newcastle was, your idea. But the other great thing is your partnership with Michael Caine, and you went on to make Pulp. Yeah. And it is a masterful performance. And indeed in Pulp as well, there's something about him at this period in his career, which is fascinating. Yes. What was it that bonded you and that made that partnership so successful?
Well, first of all, I truly had never anticipated a sort of reputable actor playing the psychopath, because he's a pretty ruthless and unpleasant creature, And Michael wanted to do it. I mean, he knew these characters. I didn't have to direct him in that sense at all. He presented me with this performance of such coldness that it was breathtaking. Yeah. And I realized also, it was the first time I'd worked with very good actors in my other films, but I'd never worked with a film star, and film stars are different. There's no two ways about it. And Michael Caine, when I was shooting in the bar, the long bar right at the beginning of the film, and the phone call comes in, and the waiter says, "Is Mr. Carter in the room?" And Michael puts his drink down, walks up, and comes to the phone, and picks it up, and his head fills the whole frame. And I knew this was something else altogether, not at all what I'd anticipated. This was I had to jack the film up, to meet this kind of amazing performance he was about to give me, because we only just started the film. That was important actually to me.
And again, what you just said about Michael Caine, how you're responding to what you realised he was bringing, again, working on instinct. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, it was kind of curious, because I was also introduced to, the world of the film star that he had. He had as John Osborne used to say, he had a nail varnish Rolls Royce, and he had, a driver, and he had a gopher. And he was in the coffin, by the way. The guy we had in there, you could see him breathing. So Reg Nivitt, being Michael's chauffeur, we put him in there, and he was as soon as he was asleep, it was perfect. And so it was, so I realized then that, again, it was another world that Michael was in. I was so excited about all these productions. When he came up the night before, I said, I want to sort of show you these amazing locations I've found. And I get out the roller, his roller, not mine. And I walk over towards the pub, and I look round, and it was his minder who was with me, Johnny. So Johnny would come in and check the pub out, before Michael would go in there. So they would go into this pub, and there'd be one old man dribbling in the corner like that. There was absolutely no threat whatsoever, but you have to be cautious if you're, a star. He didn't come to the last, the rap party or came very briefly, because somebody's liable to take a swing at him, and he didn't like that. Who does? You don't want some drunk guy who thinks he's the hard man, not Michael. So he didn't, he's very careful to avoid any confrontation like that, which is sensible.
There's a big Hollywood experience kind of came in 74 with The Terminal Man, starring George Segal, as a man convicted of wife beating who agrees to have a computer implant to control his moods. And not surprisingly, something then goes wrong. It felt like another of your anxieties about society and technology and ethics, in this case, medical ethics. Can I ask what your experience was like on that film?
Well, first of all, I went to Los Angeles. It was a bit like when I went to London, and I didn't know anybody. Again, I didn't know anybody. And not only was I writing and directing this film for Warner Brothers, I was also producing it. And so I was incredibly lonely. I mean, and I was quite scared of the whole process. And I proceeded. I wrote the script. I sent it to Michael Crichton, who politely said he didn't. I changed it quite a bit, the film.
It's based on the Michael Crichton
Yes,
novel.
exactly. And he politely said he didn't like what I'd done, but that was it. It was fine. I went on and I started doing it. And the experience of making the film was absolutely wonderful. I fought tooth and nail not to shoot in the studio. Frankly, again, I was terrified of shooting in the studio. Got all those old technicians who've been around for years, and they've seen all the great directors, Billy Wilder and all these wonderful people that I adored. They'd seen, and they said, "Oh, blimey, so I'm directing this film." And I thought, "Oh God, I'm not sure." Anyway, the production designer, Fred Hartman, who was wonderful, he talked me into building in the studio. So we built the whole of the hospital in the studio. We built various other things in the studio. And when I started shooting, I loved it. I loved working in a studio because you had total control. The cinematographer had the control of the lighting, the sound, everything. And it was comfortable. I could make a studio film again, not on location there, but studio film, yes. But
well, there is a science fiction link then to the film that has perhaps, to your surprise, become one of the most beloved films in British cinema. Flash Gordon, based on the old 1930s film serial. I had to find a clip. Don't ask me how I chose this one, but let's have a taste.
Look, water is leaking from her eyes. Oh.
It's what they call tears. It's a sign of their weakness. This will help you on your way.
Mad. I tell you, it was very embarrassing because sometimes I play music on the set, and I was playing when Queen came to see me during the production. I was shooting this scene and I had Pink Floyd playing over it, The Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, it's excruciatingly embarrassing. Anyway, there we are. So yeah.
Well, what can I say? A certain film critic who's in the room said, "How did a man as straight as Mike Hodges make a film as camp as Flash Gordon?"
Well, I needed a film. And Dino, for reasons I never understood, he persisted until I did it.
And you were stepping in. What was it, Nicholas Rowe?
Nicholas Rowe. Well, Nick had introduced me to Dino, and for some reason and during the shooting, I plucked up the coast. We're now friends, and it's all going smoothly. And I said to Dino, I can't understand why you chose me to make this film. I mean, I don't know anything about special effects. I don't know anything about comics. I never heard of Flash Gordon practically before this. And he looked at me and he said, "Mike, I liked your face." So I liked your face. I mean, Dino was the peasant, really. And everything was played on the faces. He would go up to an air flight to fly somewhere, and he'd see the pilot. He didn't like the look of his face. He wouldn't fly in it. That's what I was told.
Instinct.
So yes, he wouldn't. He was quite serious. And by the way, I could hate this evening to pass without thanking my operator, Gordon Heyman, who's here tonight, who helped me make this film, and we survived it together.
Yeah,
I tell you.
definitely did. Fantastic. Absolutely. How much power did you have to shape what we see if you were inheriting a film? Because I was just thinking things like all those scenes shot in that kind of big main chamber, the red. If you look at the last Star Wars trilogy, it's the villain's lair is always red. There's something about the way you scaled up and presented these big set piece moments, which has been hugely influential on science fiction since.
Well, first of all, I have to say that I inherited not Nick's conception of the film, but I did inherit a brilliant production designer and costume, and Danilo Donati. Now, Danilo had worked with Fellini in many films, and he was a very theatrical designer. Now, he and Dino were like that. They loved each other, And so I realized quite early on, thank heavens, that I had no control over the film, basically. And that what I would do would wait until what I saw on the set, and then I'd adapt it. So it became an improvisation, which I loved doing, I might add. I really enjoyed it. So I'd add lines and, why don't we make the blood a color suitable to the character? If it's a princess, have blue blood, and so on, like all these little details that you added as it went along. And it became, I enjoyed doing it. Although in many ways I had no control over it, although I did in an odd way, because I'd make up things. So Danilo's costumes were often crazy, and I sometimes wondered he'd ever read the script at all. There's a scene with Dale where she's beating up all the pigmen, and in the script she does karate chops and this and that, and she turns up and in this costume, which is the sort of heavy metal, basically, and high heels. So I thought, oh, fucking hell. So I said, okay, take the shoes off and leave them down on the floor like they're outside of a hotel room to be cleaned. And then she punches out the first pigman, and then she moves the shoes, and keeps moving the shoes around. So she always kept tab of the shoes. And all these little things just sort of happened, and one just made them up as we went along. I had a wonderful crew who, could also adapt and fill up all my ridiculous needs.
That is one of my favourite bits, with her moving her heels every time she takes out another goon. Excellent. I want to show two more clips. We should say there's a chance for you to ask questions. We'll have mics either side of these aisles, so you'll be able to come down and ask. Black Rainbow, 1990, is a gothic industrial thriller, is how I describe it, with your characteristic metaphysical depth. So quantum mechanics and its new theories about time add a wonderful eeriness to the story. Shot on location in the Deep South, the film stars Rosanna Arquette and Jason Robards as father and daughter with a touring kind of seance act. She's a medium. She can communicate with the dead, but when they come to a town with a power plant suffering serious safety issues, time might be running differently. What if she can see not into the past, but into the future? Let's have a look at this clip.
Is your daddy's name Tom?
Yeah. Tom Murphy. And my husband is Tom Curon. But it's my daddy that's dead.
It's not your daddy talking to me, Mary. Did he die violently?
No.
This man did. I can feel the impact. His chest has exploded. Blood and bone on the wall. Flock wallpaper. Do you have a white carpet?
Yeah. I had it late last week.
I'll tell her, Tom.
How did you know?
He says, don't worry about a thing, Mary. His chest is healed and his ribs are back in place. His organs.
But Tom's not dead!
I can hear him. I can hear him playing his guitar. He's very happy over there, Mary. There's another man with him. I can see him quite clearly. brown hair, smiling. What's his name, Tom? You don't know his name? I know it, though. I can see his house in Chicago. His wife, waving.
Mother, for God's sake.
Something. Something. Dangling in his hand. It's a gun.
No.
Black gloves. Black gloves. Black gun.
No. No. No!
It came out of your time in the US on an earlier project, I think, and you had been reading a lot of newspapers and about the targeting of union officials, hadn't you? Again, rooted in your phrase, the compost of intensive research.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's interesting. First of all, North Carolina is a non-union state. So I was able to take my British crew, Gordon Hayman again, and I was able to shoot it there, which was a delight. The film was, I really enjoyed it.
Every aspect of the locations, the cast.
Yes, again, that was, and what was also great was the extras were just fantastic. The people in there, all the faces, their attention span was just incredible. So it was a joy, and I had Rosanna and Jason Robards, well, they're both wonderful to deal with, and Tom Hulse. But anyway, but all the other actors, I cast in about 2 days. I saw about 200 local actors in Charlotte in North Carolina. And all these wonderful actors. I mean, the guy who plays the Jewish chief of police in the town was a Jewish dentist. I mean, and they were all sort of unlikely people, but they were wonderful to work with. And I had a very happy time on that film.
And I described it at the beginning as a metaphysical poet, and the range of things that you draw and turn into cinema is fascinating. So at the very beginning of the film, you may not notice it at first, but her watch seems to be running fast. You had been reading a lot about kind of quantum physics.
Yes, I was. Well, I still am. I still find it wonderful that we don't know bugger all. and there are so many mysteries out there. How particles in different places at the same time, and a whole range of realizations that we accept, but we don't know how they or why. But we luckily we're able to use them. I just love that mystery being left. If everything's over explained, then it's a sad world. I think, frankly, I love it.
And it's a great era of mystery.
So I thought I'd play with time.
Absolutely. And it really benefits from rewatching. So I have one more clip to show, and then we can take questions. And this is from Croupier, 1998.
Good.
It's a film that I remember when it came out was hailed as this kind of great British film. People recognised that it was your vision. To some extent, I guess it got slightly claimed by that whole Cool Britannia thing. But it is a fascinating watch. Clive Owen, who I'm delighted to see is here, plays a writer drawn back into being a croupier by his father, who has some kind of deal going. This is from early on in the film, and it's him going for his interview.
3 types of casino in the UK. High volume, small action, in the middle of the road. It's us. Okay, Charlie.
Do you have a salon privé?
I tried. Wasn't enough business. Punters like company.
Welcome back, Jack, to the house of addiction.
Thanks, Charlie. Right, let's see you handle the chips.
I have to assume the serial numbers on the bowl and wheel correspond.
We check every 2 days.
Why not every day?
That's the procedure here. Right, sort the chips. Go. Good. Right, now pay me out 1,825. Very good. Okay, let's have a look at your blackjack.
$14. Too many. 19, 16. Too many. 13, 18, 14, 19, 20.
What's the count?
-9.
Make it -8.
-9.
What makes you so sure?
It's a rule. Always stand by your first count. The odds are you're right.
Good call.
You want me to check?
I said good call.
It had taken him 45 minutes, but Jack now had Mr. Reynolds' number. The man couldn't count.
Okay. Clive, thank you.
And of course, the basement casino, the basement where Jack
Yes.
lives. You'd mentioned at the beginning being in a submarine. What was it about the basement as well and that whole world that you wanted to explore?
Well, Paul and I worked on the script. I mean, Paul wrote the script, but we worked on it for about 6 months off and on, pretty well all the time, but we were waiting to get the green light. And we came to various decisions. One was that Jack was not a very good writer. He only had one book in him, like a lot of people. And secondly, that my suggestion, because we were shooting it in Germany, and this is not just the only reason, but that I always had a great fear of Europuds, where you see filmmakers trying to, use Europe, where they've got the money from to justify it all with that. Anyway, so I thought if we put them underground, if we put them in a basement flat and we put the casino underground, it solves that problem, but also there's not a moment of daylight in the whole film, so it gives it a kind of underground sort of sense, and I think that contributed to. And we took terrible liberties really with the casino. There's a lot of mirrors in that casino, and anyway. But I'm glad we did, because it's not a real world. It's it's a kind. Once you enter it, as he does, then it's a kind of fantasy world as well, a sort of unreal world.
Yeah, no, I mean, it felt again that you'd done real research into that world, and we heard it even in that clip.
Yeah.
The house of addiction,
Yes.
addiction, manipulation.
Right.
Did you see it as part of, in a sense, a body of work looking at how British institutions operate?
Yes,
So
well, I felt that the film epitomized what was happening in my own country. It seemed to be switching to greed. Now, casinos are being used many times by filmmakers as a sort of metaphor for life. I didn't quite want to do that. So, and as the film didn't do it in that way, I took the idea on, and I did say to the people who financed it that the sound of the casino would go over real life outside of the casino. And indeed, you hear the roulette ball, banging around in various scenes outside of the location of the casino itself. So I think it gave it a kind of continuity and a kind of cohesion to the whole film.
One thing which is just interesting about the timing is it comes out in 1998, so a year into the new Labour government. But of course, New Labour, one of the big things they did was massively expand
Yes.
the casino sector,
Yes.
this idea that it was just another leisure pursuit. And we're only now, in the last couple of years, seeing the reaction back against it. So in a sense, it's almost predicting what was to come.
Sure.
And I wonder, as you mentioned earlier, your politics and that journey that
Yes.
you've been on, I wonder what that era of the early 2000s did to you when you thought about your filmmaking and making films about what was going on in British society when we'd had.
Well, I mean, disappointment. I just the Iraq War was a terrible mistake, I think. But generally, I think it wasn't a very happy period. I love this place. If I didn't love Britain, I couldn't feel like this, But I am disappointed what's happened, and still am, even more so. So it's a sort of kind of curious despair that grips you basically pretty well all the time. You think, why am I miserable about it? And it's because I think the place has just gone so seriously wrong. And it's not, the reasons for it, we all know, but we seem to be incapable of correcting it. We're all finding it difficult anyway, let's put it that way.
One other thing I wondered is then, are there films that you wished you'd made that haven't quite happened yet? And what are they?
Well, for a start, getting Black Rainbow made was very difficult to get an actress to play the role. So I wrote several scripts for women with the main lead, and I always they were always for American actresses, because I felt that the power was in America, and I therefore was interested in exploring that. And I just failed to get the actresses interested. Because they were political, I think. They were scared of politics in America at that time, particularly. So I think that was part of the reason.
Interesting. When was that made?
That was 1968, I think, yes. So, well, Suspect, it's my first sort of full-length feature, television feature film. And it started by the fact that I read something somewhere that the number of people who disappeared each year, and I started from that point. All these films start from some tiny detail often, and that was one of them. So I also came up. It was a very personal film, and I wanted to exorcise that element of my life, basically. So it was about a marriage, and it was exploring the way that there is a murder involved in the story, but the murderer and the physical killing you see in parallel with this marriage, where the husband hasn't come home, and you realize that he's basically been spiritually murdered. So I've run these two tracks together, basically. That's if that makes sense to you. Well, some people just they oh God. Some people know how to use the camera, and Clive, who's here tonight, has that same ability, as far as I'm concerned, that Michael had. And Rosanna Arquette has it, and Jason Robart certainly has it. So I don't know. It's some quality which I don't know whether it's baggage that they bring to the role or whatever it is, but they know. Michael Caine knew from the beginning how he was going to be a star. He never deviated from that, and he just knew from the beginning how to act and conduct his whole life around it. And all the Italian actresses that I worked with in Flash Gordon, they'd all turn up at the studio dressed to the nines. They had fur coats, they're all made up. Because in Italy, the diva, the star, was a star. Even in the morning when they turned up for filming, they'd be dressed as a star. So it's some spark that some actors have, but they have to be good actors as well. Well, thank you for bringing that subject. I thought I got away free. No, never works like that. No, Damien too was a horrible experience, truly horrible. It was my fault. I shouldn't have. I don't like horror films, and I shouldn't have tried. I was offered Damien 1, which of course I think Dick Donner did a brilliant job. The script I thought was absolutely abominable. It was a joke. I used to leave it in my sitting room and read bits of it. But Dick Donner turned it into a really good film, and I thought I could do the same with the second one. And the second one was basically what I liked about it was that the largest corporation in the world was being operated by the devil's child. who've been came from a goat, for God's sake. And so being a socialist of sorts, anyway, I thought the idea of this large corporations, which was cornering the food market and dealing in foodstuffs of all sorts, was being run by the devil. And he's surrounded by acolytes. I often look at it or think about the Johnson government and think, all these people defending this man, it's very like The Omen, actually. People coming out and they just defend him, they're like fools. Mind-boggling. Well, Michael, I'm sure it's not just one gangster. I suspect it's a collation of, I would think, I don't know, maybe it was one person. But usually we all, we put various elements together to come up with the role. And, there's no question he knew this character and wanted to play him for reasons only he can answer, really. And I researched, I did my bit. I remembered when I decided on Newcastle, there had been a crime that had been resolved at the La Dolce Vita nightclub. Can you imagine that our Dolce Vita nightclub? It's a bit like in the film. I have this cheeky thing of a boarding house being called Las Vegas. So anyway, what's it called? The nightclub, and there'd been a murder there. And now it's also happened that the murder was tied up with fruit machines, and the fruit machines were going to the working men's clubs. And one of the employees of the gangster was actually, they had a false bottom, and there were 6 penny pieces going in. 6 penny pieces. Do you remember those? Anyway, so they clean out this every night. So one of the guys who's going around cleaning it out was also pocketing sixpences. I find, it's really looking back. So anyway, so I investigated this, and I led me to the location for the Osborne house at the end, but also it led me to a whole load of characters that had been involved in parties at the house and things like that. And so I was able, it rooted me. Michael Caine didn't need rooting. I did, though, because it's a world I don't know anything about. Michael comes from a rough background, and I didn't, So I rooted myself by research, as usual. So it's the same old story for me, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, there's just one other thing which I forgot to mention, which is I think Jean-Pierre Melville was a big influence on you, and a particular film of his, Bob le Flambeur, is that right?
Yes.
Why that film, and why his work?
I know, it's just a wonderful film. I loved his film.
Gambler as well, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. Yes, it's a long time since I've seen it. I don't remember saying that, but I loved all Melville's films. Paul Marsberg worked with him, so who wrote Croupier.
And as someone who is so respected as a kind of great British filmmaker, is there a film of yours that you're particularly proud of? And what would you say to people who might be thinking of a career in film? Like one lesson that Mike Hodges would give them from the benefit of his experience?
I don't know. I have to say I'm completely out of touch. The industry's changed. And I was speaking to the operator, Gordon, that I talked about. And I said, do you miss it? And he said, no. He said, I miss what it used to be. And I think I'd be the same, frankly. I tried to get films made afterwards. I failed miserably. I was no good at putting money together for films. I just failed. And when I came, so this is after I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, which I think is equally good as Croupier. It's just a different film. Different kind of film, but I'm very proud of that film. The critics here killed it. Not elsewhere, nowhere else, but here. And they said it was sort of pathetic remake of Get Carter. It was just ridiculous. Anyway, I don't know. So I don't know what I was talking about. What was I talking about?
You were just talking about what lesson you might give to filmmakers.
Oh, yes. Oh, God. Yes, I was trying to get around that question. I think twice. I tell you what, I think I know one Frenchman that he was married to a friend of mine, and he made one film, and he spent 30 or 40 years trying to get another one made. And I think that's ill-advised. If you recognize that it's difficult. You're not going to get it made. Just move on, go somewhere else, because it's a ruthless business. You're not going to beat the odds, I don't think. If you lucky if you do. Let's put it that way.
Well, what's been so wonderful is the chance to share your kind of filmmaking journey on screen together and have a chance to see so many of the films that the BFI is showing. I'm going to do something, I don't want to freak you out, but in India, which is where my family are from, there's a tradition to show respect to your elders and to people you've learnt from. And I'm going to do it now, which is to touch your feet. Thank you. Mike Hodges.